Okay. So, hi everyone. Happy Friday as always, and welcome to Capella Lunch and Learn sessions. My name is Dana, and we're on our fourth session of our governance and automation series. We have Lucas with us again, and he'll be explaining Azure Policy. So, over to you.
Thank you, Dana, for the introduction. Yes, I would also like to welcome everyone in our Cloud Lunch and Learn series on Azure governance and automation. Today, we have a really interesting topic. Today, we are going to be speaking about Azure policies. My name is Vukašin Terzic. I work as a cloud solution architect for a company that is based in Czech Republic. I'm also Microsoft Azure MVP, and I was recently recognized as MVP. I work with Azure almost daily now. It's part of my job. I work with it on the with my clients on the Azure, using Azure Policy is actually like something that I get in touch almost daily. So I'm glad that you all joined in today. The best way to, if you have any questions later on after we finish, the best way to get in touch with me will be with Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm not going to go to show you too many slides today. It will be mostly demo, but we have to start with some introduction. In this fourth session of the series, we finally get to using Azure Policy, which is a tool that we rely on almost daily. And unfortunately, this is going to be only like introduction session. We will not have enough time to show all the advanced features and in just 1 hour. But I will try to focus on things that are important and hopefully cover enough for you to start using policies immediately after this call. So what is the Azure Policy? You can say it like this. It's a mechanism that helps us to enforce some rules and standards at scale. When we do this, we also have a dashboard where we can see and evaluate the state of the policy and this enforcement, and also like in the aggregated way, or to look into individual policies and resources. What I heard a few times, and I don't like that, is that usually people coming from on-premises, try to compare Azure policies with group policies in Windows Active Directory. And I don't like that comparison really much because there is a significant difference there. Similarity is that both of these technologies allow us to apply some configuration at scale, of course. However, the typical usage of the GPOs would be to configure something, and that's something that can usually be configured manually. But instead of doing that and going then one by one to each of the computers and applying that settings manually, you can configure a GPO and, of course, apply that at scale. And that's how you typically use the GPOs. But that's not actually the way how you would use Azure Policies. Azure Policies allows us to enforce some rules and keep our environment consistent. We can use them to configure something, like to make changes, but that's a limited usage and it's not the primary intention here. In most cases, we will use Azure Policies to either audit the existing environment or to keep it like in a way, like a consistent way that we want it to be. And that is happening not by making changes to the resources, but in most cases by denying creation of a resource if that something that user is trying to do does not comply with the rules we configured. And actually that's like the beauty of it, because again, in the on-premises, we didn't have that functionality to be able to keep things in order before they get created. And with like Azure Policy, we can easily define that resources can be saved, let's say in a specific Azure region. And if ever anyone tries to do it somewhere else, then they will get an error message and they will not be able to do it. And I'll be showing all of that in just a second. So now, like why we need it, and what it can do for us. Well, we talked about this before in the previous sessions. If you're here for the first time, I'm just going to briefly repeat it. Keeping our Azure environment consistent, secure, compliant, and cost-effective is very important, but still very, very difficult. When we design our environment, we can create some rules and put them in our documentation on paper, but the reality is that users will not be able to follow that, to follow all of those simple rules. They will either make a mistake or they will forget that the rule existed and do it in their own way. And then especially if we have different teams working on Azure, it's very hard to enforce something on the users. And so we can, of course, create this like a manual process that someone will have to approve each resource that is being created, or specific like group of people will only be creating resources, but then we lose the speed and the agility of the cloud. Or we can leave users to do whatever they want, but then we will end up with the environment that is expensive, definitely like not cost effective. It's probably going to be insecure. We are going to fail some compliance requirements and so on. Or we can use Azure Policies, and that allows us to define all those rules and then enforce settings we need without leaving users and giving them a chance to make a mistake. And that's why I think the using Azure Policies is absolutely necessary in any Azure environment we have. So that's it for the slides. Let's switch over to Azure Portal, where I'm going to show you the environment, the how and where you can start creating it, and how you can start actually using the existing ones. And then after we show all of this, then we will like dig deeper and try to show you things like such as making your own policies, explaining policy structure, policy effects, evaluation of the results, and so on. So Azure Policy, very easy to find. You just go here in search and type policy, and okay, policy, and we learned last time that this search field is actually using resource graph. And now when we get to the main interface of the Azure Policy, it's pretty simple. It looks very similar to everything else we have in Azure. And there are a couple of things that we actually need to learn here before we are able to start using any policies. So first thing we see here, this is the overview pane where we have the evaluation of policies that are already applied. In this environment, I only did 2 policies yesterday, and I applied them both on the my subscription, and I can see that they are non-compliant. We will come back to this more in depth in the second half of today's presentation. So then we can see here authoring, which is some where we will be able to create our policy and assign the policy. So first, there is a difference. The policy definition is actually definition of that policy itself. That means it's telling we are in here in definition, we are defining what that policy is doing and how it is doing it, with what rule and so on. And then when we create a policy definition, it's just like a JSON file that sits there and it's not doing anything. And once we do that, then we have to do the policy assignment. And policy assignment is done here, and we can assign we can assign the policy to a specific scope. And as we were discussing that previous sessions, scope of policy assignment can be a management group, can be subscription, it can be a resource group or a resource. During the policy assignment, we have option to do some exclusions. We can exclude the part of the scope. So, for example, if we decide to assign a policy to entire subscription, we can still go and say if we want to exclude some specific resource groups, for example. And after we assign the policy, in that moment, policy will become active and it will apply on that specific scope. Of course, it's going to report all those, depending on the type of the policy we create, the result might be different. When I go back to definitions, you probably noticed that there is one more thing, definition type called initiative. So, of course, we have we have policy itself, and then there is also something called initiative. And initiative is a group of policies. So we can create an initiative if we have, for example, one specific task that we want to achieve, and for achieving that, we need to apply multiple policies. So instead of going and assigning those individual policies one by one, we can create a policy initiative that will allow us to group those policies within that one initiative and then apply to the scope as one thing, as one group of policies with one single purpose. Of course, that completely depends on you how you want to group them. Maybe you want to create all the policies that are related to one specific task, as I said, or you just want to group all your policies that are related, let's say, for one team of people or one group of resources or something like that, and you don't want to forget one or something like that when you're assigning it, so you are just going to create initiative. Again, initiative has to be defined first, where you give it a couple, you enter the name, description, and so on, and then you select all of the existing policies that you want to add into initiative. Right. And then assignment goes the same. And then in the overview part, you can see here, go back, you can see here that I have one policy assigned and that I have one initiative assigned. And here is one initiative that consists of 9 policies within that one initiative. So those are the basics. We have, of course, here exemptions where we can exclude some things and so on. That can also be defined during the assignment process. So what can we do with those policies? So as you see here, when I go back and forth and switch between these, you can see that we have a bunch of policies already here, and those are built-in policies. You can see that there is a type custom and built-in. Built-in policies are those that Microsoft created for us and already included in Azure. They can be found in GitHub, and they are already here in our Azure subscription. And what I find out that there are many tasks that can be accomplished just by going and assigning those existing policies without even changing a single word in them. However, the reality is that I think that every environment will sooner or later be in a need of creating their own policies, custom policies. And the best way of doing that would be probably by editing one of those existing ones and trying to show it. So let's go and try to do something here. I'm first going to use the existing policy, and then we will see the result of it, and then we will try to create our own, and where I will explain you more about the structure of the JSON file. Right, so we are not interested in definitions now, because we want to create a policy. And then when I just select policies here in my subscription, you can see that there is really a lot of them. Best way of looking into this would be probably, or how I like to do it, is searching by name. If there is something particular you would like to do, then of course you can search and see if there is a policy already for that, or you can select category. And there are a bunch of categories. So let's see what we can use today. Let's work with tags. Okay, so we have tags. We all know that tags are important in Azure, assigning tags to our resources and so on. So these are the already built-in policies that we can use to work or to do something with our tags. And usually those names are self-explanatory, at least for me they are. And you can see that we have different keywords here in the beginning. Require, append, inherit. This might give you a hint what that policy is actually doing. I mentioned that we have that we can have a different policy effects. So similar to group policy objects in a Windows Active Directory, where you could do like a change and so on. Here we have something that's called Azure Policy Effect, and we have several of those. One of them would be append, then we have audit, audit if not exist, deny, deny if not exist, and modify. And then there is a disable. I hope I didn't miss anything. And so each of those different effects is doing a little bit different things. I'm not going to go explain all of these now. But what's also important to understand is that there is order in which those are evaluated. So if you have a multiple policies assigned to a same scope and they have different effects, then they will be evaluated in a different order. And so that might give you different results that you expected. So it's just important to understand that things like, I don't know, append and modify will happen first, and then like deny, and then I think the audit will happen last. And that's like a logical order, because if you're changing something, it should happen before you just like audit something. Right, so those are the effects, and this is selected when you try to write your own policy. And so we have here a couple of them. So let's take a look first what I have in my Azure. So I'm going to go to resource groups. This is like completely test subscription. I don't have anything production here. Okay, so I have a couple of resource groups here, and you can see that on this resource group I have some tags. Should be able to see that in a second. I have some tags, and it is just one. But if I click then on the resources, okay, this is slow, so I'll try to do a demo with not too much clicking. Okay, let's go back here. Let's add another tag to this resource group, and then what we are going to do is to tell inherit the tag from the resource group. So this is going to be a modify policy that is going to take all the resources in a specific resource group and apply the specific tag, and the value will come from the value that is assigned to the resource group. That's what the policy will do. So if I click on that, there will be a description. Add or replace specific tag and value from the parent resource group when any resource is created or updated. Existing resources disappeared. Existing resources can be remediated by triggering a remediation task. Perfect. I think this is a good example of showing a couple of things at the same time. So we saw that the tag environment was there. So let's make a new tag. Will be, let's say, project. And the tag is going to be Azure Policy Demo. Okay. So that's the tag, and I'm adding it to this resource group only. So there is a way, of course, we can do this by PowerShell. Failed to assign tags. Why? That's interesting. Okay, something's wrong with Azure now. Let's try that again. Let's try that one more time. Change. I have the rights, so I don't think that will be the case. Project. It's the value. Right. Click save. Failed. Okay, something's wrong. Now we have a tag, it's called demo, or the tag is called project and value is demo. And of course, that's a new tag that I just added, and it's not on any of those resources in this resource group. So I'm going to now to look in this policy, and you can see here that this is policy, this is the policy definition. We will come back to that a little bit later. And what this policy is actually relying on, it's relying on parameters, which means that we are not hard coding the tag name here in the policy definition code, JSON. But we are actually using parameter, and you can reuse this policy multiple times, and every time you assign it, during that assignment, it will ask you to provide a tag name only, because the value will be inherited from whatever is on the resource group. And of course, this policy has specified rules here, and specify effect, which is modify, and that effect modify will actually cause that if there is already a tag called project on one of those resources, the value of the tag will be overwritten by actually this value. And if there is a missing tag, then we can actually run it in a remediation mode, which will go ahead and add all of those missing tags, which is perfect, which basically that can save us a lot of time. Also, we don't have to bother users by users to go and add this tag every time when they create a resource. We can actually just say, okay, so we know that this resource groups belongs to a specific project. If we want to be able to track all the resources related to the project, then let's create a policy that will do this remediation for us automatically. The other way would be here to require a tag, and I'm sure there is a policy for that as well. And we are going to test that one as well. So I'm not going to change anything here, but if I did change something, then I wouldn't actually save it as this built-in policy, but I would save it as my own custom policy, and will write a little bit different description here and so on. Because I'm not changing anything at all, I'm just keeping the existing one, the built-in one, then I don't have to do that, I don't have to duplicate, I don't have to save as. I can actually just go and assign. Right, so we were talking about the assignment process, that we need to assign in scope. So our scope here can be selected, and that scope can be a management group, can be a subscription, or it can be like specific resource group. So we did it on this one, so let's assign that to a specific resource group, not everywhere. Of course, if I just one thing, this cannot be deleted like this, like you cannot go and delete it from here. You have to go here and clear all selections, or close this and open it again if you want to, for example, remove the resource group. But this time we are doing it here for the resource group. That is our scope, first thing that we need to define. Second thing would be to give assignment a name, and of course it will pre-fill here the name, but because each assignment is different and each assignment uses different parameters, I think this should be more custom. This should be more customized. So I'm just going to do that. Easily inherit project tag from the resource group. Fill. Then there is a policy enforcement. So in our case, this doesn't have too much of how to say. This doesn't have too much of effect because this policy is a modify policy, which will allow user to create, but it will automatically add the tag. So this will be more important in case that we actually try to create something deny. Let's say deny if there is no tag. And if we enforce it, it's here, then in that case, the enforcement will say, okay, sorry, you cannot create this resource because it doesn't have a specific tag name. Or it can also, of course, be tag name and value. If you wish. And so for us, it's not a big difference. Of course, if we don't enforce it, then it will not be applied next time, and we will have to do remediation task. Then the next thing are parameters, and you saw this parameter called tag name was defined in a policy definition, and as I said, we only defined in the definition the parameter, like the tag name, which in our case is project, and we are not entering here the tag value because that will be inherited from the resource group. And then in the next step, we have option to create a remediation task. And what that will do is that it will go and find all the resources in that specific resource group and append the tag to them. If we don't do that, nothing will happen to existing resources, and this policy will be only applied to the newly created resources. So I'm going to leave it without remediation for now, so I can show you that. And then the last thing, yeah, okay, that's identity. And so for the last thing, you can see here, this is the policy overview, and let's create. And so what we are creating is assignment. I'm not creating new policy, I'm creating a policy assignment from existing policy. And so here is my policy assignment. If I go back now to Azure Policies and if I go to Overview, you will see that I have now third policy here. You will see that in a second. And compliance state not started. Compliance state is something that actually go and checks if there are any resources in that scope that are not compliant or not compliant with the requirement, and that runs automatically only once in 24 hours. You can initiate that compliance check. There are like multiple ways how this can be triggered manually, and basically are not started yet, but even if it runs, it will tell us that all of those resources are not compliant. So let's go back to our assignments. We can see that our assignment yeah, it's here. Our assignment is here. And now if I go back to my, oh, I'll do that here. If I go back to my resource group, which is a scope of this assignment, you'll see that nothing changed here. We have this project, but if I take a look at any of those resources, you will see that there is no tag. That the tag is not added automatically because we didn't do. Okay, then maybe I made a mistake. There is a tag, you see, but the value is different. Perfect. So we will see how those tags got overwritten. Right. So let's try create a new resource. What should we create? Not a server, that takes a long time. Something that goes quickly. Network security group. That's quick and free. I'm going to create a new network security group. It's a resource in our resource group, which is the cloud on-prem, on-prem, and it's going to be called demo. Doesn't matter. I'm going to delete it later, and I'm not going to add any tags. Okay, I'm not adding tag, and let's create it. Okay, go to resource, and you can see the tag was added automatically. And that's the modify part. It happened automatically. I really didn't have to do anything. So, however, of course, in that resource group, we have a bunch of different resources that are they don't have it. And to be able to do that, so let's go edit our assignment and let's create a remediation task. So we have to go to assignments. Here we find our assignment, and it's good that we give it a good name because now we know that project tag assignment is this one. So I'm going to do that. And parameters are okay. I'm not changing that. It's the same tag. I will go to remediation and I will create a remediation task. Policy to remediate. It's the policy that we used. It's built-in policy. It's not in policy. And so I'm not sure why it's creating in EastUS. What is going to happen now is that it's going to create a managed identity, basically a run as account, and that account will have contributor access to our resource group. And under that account, the action will be run and the tag will be assigned. To do this, to create run as account, you have to have high privileges in your tenant. And also, this is not probably the best way to do things like this. Ideally, you would pre-create this identity and then use a PowerShell to run to initiate a remediation task. And for that, you can specify which identity you want to use. We are doing like the introductory session demo here. So this is how you can do it. Okay. Save. Okay, getting some notification that we might have some questions here. Okay, so we have few. Let's just see if this is assigned properly, and then I can, while we wait, maybe I can answer a couple of questions. Okay, so this is now applied. Let's see here. Oh, I didn't refresh. Oh, by the way, By the way, it's the thing here is that this remediation task runs only once. It's not something that like keeps remediating, because actually it runs only once, and then it gets applied. The policy in this case gets applied every time when you create a new resource, so you don't have to like go back and do it on the existing resources. Okay, so theoretically now in here, we should see if it's running, but more importantly, we should see if it's running if we go to our resource group and see if those resources actually got the result. So let's open something, whatever. Still not. So let's give it some time. I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think it's clear what's going to happen. It's going to remediate that change for all the existing resources that were not compliant. And those existing resources are those in the scope, which is only this resource group and nothing else. So eventually, all of those will get their tag called project with the value demo. And if they already have, which they do, it's called Azure Migration Demo, that will be overwritten with just a demo. Right, so let me take a look into questions. Follow. Thank you. What does the process of authoring policies via ARM templates or Terraform look like? See more. Right. So that's something that probably we are not going to completely cover today. Sure. So the policies can be run and exist in this like programmatical environment where you can like create a policy and apply policy via the ARM template. And that's something that is very well documented on Microsoft Docs page. That's from where I learned how to use that. And basically, what are the ARM templates we are going to cover like next week. There are now two questions, so I'm trying to first answer the first one. And so basically this policy is a resource as anything else. Predefine it and then deploy it and assign it via like some infrastructure as code tools such as ARM templates or Terraform. I think that's clear enough. The process of it is not very different from deploying any other like different Azure resource, because you have to define it and define like properties later on, which are, again, you can deploy it from our template, you can assign it by ARM template, and so on. So if you want to deploy your environment, like the entire environment, or maybe just a landing zone, that landing zone can already have some policies in it, and basically doing that is really easy. How I also like to deploy Azure Policies is like directly from GitHub. And to be able to do that, you can just like run one single line of PowerShell code where you specify. It doesn't have to be PowerShell, it can be Azure CLI, it can also be within the ARM template, where you just specify the path of the like GitHub page, and you run it and you get the policy deployed. Now, if the policy check fails during ARM templates, does it leave resources in a failed state, or will remediate task immediately after? Right, that's actually a good question, which I'm not sure if I'm able to completely answer. So if we, okay, so you deployed by ARM template. Well, depends on the policy, because there is no like a failed state of creating a resource. So when you create a policy first in your ARM, then the policy is created, and whatever other resource you try to apply or create, I'm sorry, via ARM templates, you will get back to the place where the policy will be applied. And if the policy is applied to the task, to the resource that you are trying to create with an ARM template, and the resource is not compliant and the policy is denied, then your creation of the resource will fail. Right? It will not get created. You will get the error message. And of course, you have to think about that when you prepare the ARM templates or any other automation, because the creating of the resource can fail because of the Azure policy. And about remediation, that's the part that if like there is no remediation that happens on schedule. So remediation that we just did is something that's happening only if we initiate it. And the remediation part that is built into policy that will actually modify your resource as it being created. So if you have a policy in place, policy is saying append this tag to every resource, then when you create a resource from ARM or from PowerShell or manually, during the resource creation, that tag will be attached. At least that's how I found it to work. Okay, then I have a question here from Pavel. Can remediation tasks be created for any effect of policy, for deny, audit, or only for modify? So there is nothing to remediate if you try to deny or audit. And I think that's the thing that Azure policies that are assigned on a scope and they have deny cannot affect existing resources, because that will potentially lead to like catastrophe scenarios. So those resources will show up as non-compliant on your overview page here, but they will not be denied, they will not be deleted. So if you have an Azure policy that is saying only allowed region is West Europe, but you go and apply that, and in this resource group is full of the resources that are in North Europe, all of those will get shown as a non-compliant resources, but they will not be like denied their existence. And there is a no remediation task that can go and change that, because obviously that's not something that can be easily changed. In some resources it cannot be changed at all. And so there is no modify for, or remediation task for anything else than modify. Hope that answers the question. So now let's go quickly here, refresh, and then let's continue. Just double checking. Double checking, still didn't happen. So let's leave that and let's go back here to policies. So that's how you make a definition, or sorry, we were doing assignment. And basically now what we did assignment here. And it's the same way, if we go back here, we can find all of those policies that I was mentioning, maybe location. So you can here allowed locations for resource group, maybe that's even like better. Or then you can have like VM size, or family enable. Okay, so to find that, you can go here, say computing, and then see allowed virtual machine size queues. Basically, you can define that here. You can use a parameter, and then in the parameter you will add like the list of the names of those VM sizes, and that will only allow specific sizes. You can do that the opposite way. You can change it here and say deny specific sizes and allow everything else. So if you want to block only like let's say like those big VMs that cost $1,000 per hour, you can do that here and then allow users to use everything else. Maybe that would be your scenario. And so you can see that there are many built-in policies here, and most of them are based with like parameters, which means it's not hard-coded here, but during your assignment, you get to choose those values. That's, of course, one way. We can go in and apply all of those. Same goes for policy initiatives. And I just want to come back here and show you a little bit what kind of policy initiatives we have here, because I think those are really, really useful. So one of the initiatives that you can find here is, for example, enable Azure monitor for VMs, or security benchmark. So here is an Azure security benchmark, and that's like a huge initiative. And I'm not sure if you are familiar. There is something like called Microsoft Security Benchmark, which is basically the lowest level of security that you should achieve in your Azure environment. And what this does is that it goes and using 136 policies, which you can see here, go and check, and everything is in audit. Nothing is like modified, nothing is going to be changed. It's just going and it's going to check all of those different things in your environment. And so all of those here are built-in policies that you can find individually, but they are now grouped here as part of the Azure Security Benchmark. And when you apply this to your environment, you will be surprised how many things are non-compliant and like badly configured. And of course, most of it is like all of it is in audit mode. So those are the benchmarks, initiatives that are already built in. And you can see here that, like, for example, you have HIPAA. So if you're in US and you want to be compliant with HIPAA, which is, I don't know what it stands for. It's like regulation and protection of health-related data. And so if you're in US and you are in that category, then this is a perfect policy for you, because it saves you a lot of time, and is prepared for you by Microsoft. Of course, again, this is only audit mode. You then have to go and fix those things on your own. Right, and so what if you need or you want to create your own policy? Well, I think that most of the companies will get in the situation when you really need to do that, when you actually want to create something, not something, but you want to create your own policy that can be, for example, I don't know, naming convention policy, right? So you want to make sure that all of your resources have some specific name, and that policy is not there, it's not built in, so which means that you have to create it, and you might end up creating like one policy for all the resource types, or you might end up creating like one policy per each individual resource type, and then combine them in initiative called naming convention enforcement, and then you apply that on the entire scope. So how to do that? Well, I think like the easiest way to start and not get really scared is actually to go and look into one of those existing policies. Right, so let's go back to policy, and let's try to find something a little bit more complicated. Doesn't matter. Okay, so this sounds pretty reasonable. And before actually you are able to do something, you should not be editing those built-in ones, but you should duplicate, say where it will be saved. You have to choose a subscription, and that policy will live in that subscription. And then I'm going to call it demo custom policy. And then we have a definition here. And so this is the JSON. This is actually a pretty simple one. What those policies need to like have. Let's first save it. Sorry, let's first save it. Okay, so this is my policy now, and if I go back here, I can go and go custom, and you see I have my first Azure policy, and this of course we didn't look into yet. So there is a structure that has to be followed. You don't necessarily need to learn JSON to be able to write these, but I think having like the knowledge of JSON goes really well with using Azure, because there are other things that are defined in JSON, like, I don't know, custom roles in RBAC and so on. So you go here. There are a couple of things that must be included. Those are like display name, there is a description, there is metadata, mode, parameters if you want, and then the policy rules. And each of those describes different part of it. I think those first ones are pretty self-explanatory. Where the magic happens is actually here in if you define parameters, but mostly it happens here in the policy rule. And so like in here you can use logical operators, and if you're doing any programming, you probably will easily understand this. Then you have conditions. So here we have if, and then we have if field type, and then conditions is equal to something, and this can be of course equals, not equals, like, not match, match, contains, and so many of those are documented. If you start writing this not here in the portal but in some code editor that has IntelliSense, like, I don't know, VS Code, you can actually go and tab and switch between those. And then what else we have? Yeah, and so this is where you define what needs to happen, and then what is the effect, and we already explained some of those effects. So this is like really basic. We don't have enough time to go dig into creating like some really custom policies, but this is just a structure that needs to be followed, and if you decide to do that, then there is so many examples on GitHub. Definitely try starting up with exploring the existing policies and maybe see what you can copy paste. Maybe you can even combine a couple of them or parts of them and create your own. And the last thing that I would like to cover, I know we are running out of time. Just one thing that actually is really important with using Azure policies is what happens after you assign them. And as a like when you start using Azure Policy, this definitely will come back to you. What happens when I assign them? Okay, I assigned, and you saw we assigned one, but where do I see the result? How do I find out if that really actually happened? And so the answer is here, but you will find out that this, what you see here, is very limiting. In a way that, okay, you can go and see that this is non-compliant, require a tag on the resource, I can see that the tag required, I didn't write it here, so there was some specific tag that I required, and on the entire scope was compliant, just this one resource group is not compliant. And I can click here for details and find out that is missing tag description. And this resource group doesn't have a tag description. Right. And that's why it's not compliant. I didn't use a remediation task. I can create a remediation task, or I can create exception. But you can see this. And then, of course, if that's one resource, you can see the resource, you can show activity log and create exception from here. But what if you have like thousands of resources here? Then like what? There is no export button here. There is no like download CSV. There is no way for you to work with that. And within here, it's nice, but what else? What can I do with it? And so for that, there is not too much you can do here from the Azure portal. But I found out that using Azure Resource Graph that we mentioned last time, or Azure PowerShell is actually really powerful, and maybe not that you need to intuitive that you can like start with it immediately, pick it up on the first try. At least for me, it took some time to go over it again and see and then learn what pieces of information are saved where. But this is now well documented, I think. You can go and dig into REST API, export this information with the resource graph. You can export this information with the PowerShell. There is a PowerShell module for Azure Policy. There is an extension for Azure CLI, and so on. So don't get scared. This information you see here is not everything. There are different ways to find that information and to work with it. Okay. So I think that's it for the demo. Let's just see, get AZ policy. Okay, so this is the Azure module that you can work with. Don't have anything else that we can fit in 1 hour. Now it's time for questions. I can see here that there is a question to show the link to previous videos. My understanding for that is that those videos are scheduled to be released in some during the scheduled calendar, so they are not ending up there immediately. There is some delay. It's because there are like many videos, and all of those videos are like released periodically. So eventually all those videos that we recorded will end up there on the YouTube. I apologize, they are not there yet. Dan asked, could you show us an example of using Azure Resource Graph? Yes, sure. So what do you want to use Resource Graph for? Find the information about Azure Policy. Last time I mentioned that we can use Azure Resource Graph, for example, to find what will happen, find the impact of the policy before we apply the policy. And that will be done if you go and search for the scope. So you will see what resources will be affected. But if you never used like Resource Graph to get information from Azure Policy, I have a better source for you. I'm not going to show it here in a demo. I am going to show you the little bit better demo, which is not done by me, but that's how I learned it for the first time. Give me a second. I should be able to find that pretty quickly. So it is this page. It's called Policy Insights. Right, and you will get here if you, I don't know how I get here, but basically when you start working with the Azure Policy results, you will find out that there are some things that you can actually find from your Azure. And to make things a little bit more simple now, you can definitely go and look at this page. But basically there are some operation groups of the results that you can get from Resource Graph or Azure Graph using REST API. And one of them is, for example, policy states. And I think, yeah, I was using this list query results for policy definition, right? Or summarize for resource group. Okay, and so you find it here. You find a way how you can, like, you get the query that you can use, you get the parameters that are explained, but the best thing is that you can try it from here. Of course, you have to be logged in to your subscription. You have to fill in some information here in the resource graph directly. This will look a little bit different, but the good thing is that you can, like, fill in those here, apply to subscription and run, and you will get the result. And this helped me a lot in the beginning when I was not all those environments for using like resource graph and so on. But I was not familiar with that. I was not aware that there are several versions of graph and several different interfaces and so on. And finding this page was like really good for me. And I'm glad that you actually asked that question so I can share it with you. Go here, play directly. You get all of those resources or queries pre-created for you, and you can see the results. Right, yes. Okay. Sure. So let me go back. Do I still have it? Yeah. There is like, this is like policy insights, but there was one page from which I came here, and I don't remember that page. I think it was in like a normal policy documentation, and if you go and follow like how to not process information, but what is the keyword there? I don't know the keyword now, but basically how to work with the results and how to evaluate the results of the policies. You will find much more information, and I think it's now like well documented on docs. So sometimes, like as I mentioned, exporting those results can be very useful as a first task. But sometimes you want to create even some different kind of automation based on those results, and you want to work with it. And if you try digging into logs and so on, you will not be able to find so much of it, especially if you don't have things like some logging enabled for a longer time than like a month. So it's a big part of working with the policies, and this screen here is not very intuitive for you to get all the information. Okay, that's it. Questions, we finished. I don't think there are any other questions. We are a little bit over time now. If you still have any questions, please let me know. And if not, then go follow this link here. You will get all those links to the important resources from there.
That's great. Thanks so much, as always. And if you guys don't have any more questions, I'm just going to pop a few links here. Ignore the first one. That's the wrong one. But if you haven't had a chance to register, please use the QR code on the screen or the link on the screen to grab your free Microsoft resources. You can find our materials shared by our speakers on GitHub. We have our YouTube channel as well. So it does take us a bit of time to post these all up, but we will have them on. So if you want to start a repo on GitHub or subscribe and get notifications on our YouTube channel, just to be notified anytime we post something up. And our upcoming sessions next week are the Azure Fundamentals series. They have their security, business continuity, governance, and subscriptions, I think. And as always, Vukasin will be back with us next Friday to talk about the ARM templates. And finally, we'd really appreciate it if you could click that very last link for a very short survey just to get your thoughts on how this session was. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.